Welcome to Inside the Mavs. Kevin Gray, Mavs pre and post game host on 97.1 The Freak on the Dallas Mavericks radio network. Joined as always by my partner Grant Afseth of Mavs Sports Illustrated, covering the Dallas Mavericks for Sports Illustrated. Appreciate you joining us on iHeartRadio, wherever you get your podcasts for free, Apple Podcasts, Spotify as well. You can also find us on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. You can find Grant on Twitter at Grant Afseth. Another episode as the Mavericks come off a loss against the Los Angeles Clippers as they get ready to take on the Houston Rockets in their final in-season tournament game. I'm going to get you that preview, plus catch up on what happened with the Mavericks and the Clippers on Saturday as they split their Thanksgiving Tinseltown trip between the Lakers and the Clippers. Before I go any further, bringing my partner Grant Afseth. Grant, what's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. It's good to have an actual consecutive home stretch coming up. Being at home after being in LA, not the worst place to be, but being there for Thanksgiving was definitely interesting. So good to be back for sure.
Yeah, it's there are worse places to be for the Thanksgiving holiday than to be in Los Angeles. So obviously the Mavericks are glad to be back as well. Jason Kidd and Tim Hardaway Jr. speaking at practice today as of this recording, is the idea being, look, we're finally going to be able to get home to be able to work on some things, but more importantly, have some games at home, as they've been on the road quite a bit. At one point, playing 5 games in 8 days. They had both of these last 2 games in Los Angeles. They're ready to come home to take on the Houston Rockets on Tuesday. Before we get there, let's get to what happened in Los Angeles on Saturday night. The Mavericks, unfortunately, losing to a Clippers team 107-88 in what was their lowest point total of the season for the Mavericks. And it was weird because, the Clippers, I didn't think played overwhelmingly that much better than the Mavericks, but defensively, they were really able to get after the Dallas Mavericks when it came to the other guys. Luka and Kyrie were your leading scorers in that game, but they were definitely missing Dereck Lively II, who missed the game as he's dealing with that back contusion. Ivica Zubac really took it to them on the glass, especially in that first quarter there for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think overall, you expected a big response from the Clippers after having allowed a massive 35-4 run in that game in Dallas where the two teams played after the James Harden trade. And they've really started to figure some things out as a team themselves. I think they've actually, I was looking at some stats. I think they were, if not, I'm not mistaken, the top defense in the NBA over their last 6 games together leading into that game. And, they definitely did not disappoint against the Mavs. I felt like, with the amount of offensive talent they have, it allowed guys like Kawhi Leonard, Paul George to really hone in defensively and do what they do best on that end of the floor. And just schematically, they were really daring role players to beat them as well. They were, doubling Luka frequently. They were icing ball screens with their tilting defense by sending that early low man to really pack the paint, make it hard to play pick and roll. And, I thought that kind of took Luka a little bit out of his typical approach. He even mentioned that after the game, saying that he, needed to basically make the easy play, get into a 4-on-3 by, accepting the double team and then getting the ball to the short roller and then letting him play out of that. But, overall, they definitely missed, Dereck Lively, as you said. They didn't have that same lob threat, that interior finishing threat to keep the defense honest. And then that becomes more of a problem when your shooting threats are not hitting shots as well. I thought the Clippers did a great job of stifling the Mavs half-court actions and then putting those role players in positions to have to, make decisions, and they were reluctant to make a play. And when they did try, more often than not, unless your name was Tim Hardaway Jr., later on in the game, there wasn't really much going on in that front as well.
Yeah, definitely missing Dereck Lively II in that game. Ivica Zubac taking advantage of that, as you saw in the game as you go through the box score a little bit. Had 14 rebounds as part of an 11.14 rebound double-double. It was the other guys. Paul George, of course, had 25 points. Terrence Mann in that game had 17. He was a plus 19. Norman Powell off the bench had 15 points as well. For the Mavericks, only 3 guys in double figures. Luka had the 30 points. Kyrie Irving had 26 on the night. And Tim Hardaway Jr. was the only other guy in double figures with 12 points. And he was a -9 on the night. So what this really came down to was their inability to rebound, and 2, their inability to knock down shots from the outside. The Mavericks going 9 of 38 from downtown. Yes, boys and girls, that is 23.7% from the three-point line, while shooting just 37% overall. you're not going to win a lot of games regardless of who you play, shooting 23.7% from the 3-point line. And that did not obviously get it done against the Los Angeles Clippers.
Yeah, definitely. And I figured, when you look through the play-by-play, I think it was at the 5:05 mark of the second quarter that a non-Luka or Kyrie player on the Mavs even made a field goal. And it was Tim Hardaway Jr., as we mentioned, who did provide a little bit of a boost. But overall, like being the only non-superstar to reach double figures, that's a very tough set of circumstances to overcome, especially when there were quite a bit of games where shooting from guys like Grant Williams, especially at the very beginning of the season, because his shooting has kind of tapered off since that really hot start. And then, Dereck Jones has provided some performances where the defense is daring him to shoot and he's attacking downhill, but he was, stifled as well. And that's where, in the big picture, it gets kind of interesting because teams have become more like willing to dare Dereck Jones to really shoot the three, leaving him wide open. There was a play where the ball really popped around, and I think it was out of a double team against Luka in the post. He got the ball out of his hands. It found Dereck Jones. And I remember this like very clearly. Paul George was pointing at James Harden to make the next rotation, and he didn't even bother to make the rotation. And Dereck Jones still didn't shoot, and he drove it into a crowded paint. It ended in free throws, I believe. But, still, like, you got to make the defense respect floor spacing to really get the most out of your identity as an offense, with Luka leading the charge and then also creating that space for Kyrie. And, those types of plays, that reluctance, in the long run, that adds up. And if you're not getting the job done defensively as a unit, then overall there's some concerns about what your overall output is and how that's going to translate to consistent success. So just seeing things like that, where you would like to see him be more aggressive shooting the three like he was in some of those games, I guess you could say, like before they went on the road against New Orleans, when teams started to really put their center on him and dare him to shoot. It's not all about Dereck Jones by any stretch, but you definitely want to see players like that kind of handle their responsibilities by making it easier on the superstars. And for him, it's shooting the three, and then with aggression, and then the other players who are already going to shoot three with aggression, they've got to knock shots down. But overall, within the flow of their half-court offense, I think the Clippers really showed that if you get into those ball screens aggressively and play physical and throw the superstars a little bit off of how they normally approach the game, it's going to be very challenging for the Mavericks to make read and react plays when they're not relying on, Luka or Kyrie. And that's definitely a challenge if the team isn't getting defensive stops at enough of a rate, for sure.
And we'll touch on this for a quick second because you mentioned Grant Williams, and you look at his last three games. He's a combined, as you go through the box score, 3, 4, that would be 11. He's 4 of 15 from three in his last three games, with a combined, as you look at the box score, that would be a combined 18 points in his last three games. So we're talking about a guy in his last three averaging a mere 6 points per game. And he has to be a guy that we saw during the early part of the season who was knocking down the shots from the outside, especially from the 3-point line, at about a 50% clip to start the season. Now, no one is going to continue to keep up that kind of rate from the 3-point line throughout the course of a season, but it just underscores what kind of impact he was having early on in the season and how that's really tapered off over the last few games. He has 5 points in the last game, 6, 7. Before that, he had double-digit games of 14, 10, and 10. And before that, on November 12th, he had 0 points against the Pelicans. So the question being, is there any concern from you early on, or is this more so just the growing pains of seeing some up and down inconsistency with a new team when it comes to Grant Williams in that way?
I think there's a little bit of both for the offense with the complementary players' contributions as a whole, because I think there were some limitations that we knew about heading into the season. When you don't have a bigger wing that can really put the ball on the floor and get downhill, shoot off the dribble, that really kind of limits things when you get into those those teams being aggressive with the double teams and like their schemes to really like limit dribble penetration from like Luka or Kyrie. And I think we're seeing the pitfalls of that sort of identity where, like as we touched on with Dereck Jones, like, he's naturally going to be someone who's going to be more reluctant to shoot and is going to try to overdrive at times, especially when the shot isn't falling. But then Grant Williams is also, it's going to be kind of the opposite, where he's going to probably shoot maybe a little bit too much at times. And if it's not falling, there's a limited array of ways he can kind of make that impact. And then when you have a rim running center who's not really going to be one of those like dump the ball in and make a play type of guys, you're going to put a lot of pressure on the two superstars. And then that comes into a bigger picture question of, is there enough like wing firepower for your team to really make the defense pay when it comes playoff time? Because this sounds a little similar when you break it down to previous versions of the roster where they had a guard that could really, make plays, whether it was Jalen Brunson or Kyrie Irving now alongside Luka, but they have sort of limited skill sets from the wing spots, and then that rim running five who, if teams really start to get into switching and blitzing, and I know he can make short roll passes, but a 19-year-old is going to be in a tough spot where post scoring is not his game necessarily. Making plays off the dribble, he can make short roll passes again, so it's not to say he's like incapable of making plays, but it's just a tough spot to put a young center in where you're basically switching, and he's going to have to really navigate off ball well. If he's going to be in a dunker spot, he's got to be cognizant of how he can like move around. But then again, while he's doing that, that's still creation being like the burden is on Luka and Kyrie to create in those instances as well. And that also gets into another sort of situation where you are going to have the burden on the two superstars, but do you have enough guard firepower that's like steady in contributions off the bench? Because the Western Conference Finals run, you at least can play that ISO heavy approach and ball screen heavy approach against the teams that weren't switching as much, because you had another guy who could kind of throw in another pitch like Spencer Dinwiddie and really like help, carry through or fill the gaps, if you will, throughout a 48-minute game with that level of, creation. So overall, it's like there's some questions I would say with the roster at large. Whether it's like the wing spots, how much pressure is on a young big man with Lively to be able to handle those responsibilities, and then also the bench as a whole, like who can step up to be that consistent creator, scoring threat that they know they'll need if they're going to be that ISO heavy sort of offense where teams put them in those positions.
Yeah, Tim Hardaway Jr. in that role off the bench is a guy that really good with catch and shoot opportunities, but not necessarily the guy that you want putting the ball on the deck, trying to create for himself or for other teammates. I mean, he can hit a pull-up jumper off the dribble, which we've seen throughout the course of his career, but in terms of extended shot creation and playmaking abilities for himself or for others, that's not something you typically want to see from Tim Hardaway Jr. in that particular way. So Grant Williams is a guy that I think will still continue to find his way. It's just been interesting to see in the last 3 games how he's really been a non-factor, especially offensively for this team, given how much of an impact he was having at the beginning of this season, especially from the three-point line. Something to watch as this team, continues to move forward over the next couple of weeks before we get to the beginning, of 2024. And obviously, we were talking about Dereck Lively II, him dealing with the back contusion that he had and suffered against the Lakers. Luka Doncic gave us all a scare when he hurt his left thumb, on a steal on James Harden in the first quarter of the game against the Clippers. Now, today, being Monday, we were at practice, and Jason Kidd speaking after practice saying that Luka Doncic had an MRI and confirmed that he has a left thumb sprain, but he would be available to play against the Rockets, which is very interesting because the last, as we do this recording, 24, 36 hours have been very interesting because Luka, after the game on Saturday night, said, hey, the initial x-ray said that my thumb was broken. I don't think it is. He has an MRI done. It confirms that it's a sprain. So a collective sigh of relief, if you will, if you're a Mavericks fan, knowing that it appears for now Luka Doncic isn't going to be missing any time with that left thumb sprain. But it was just very interesting how all that played out, given what he said, what the x-ray had said initially based off of what he described, and then an MRI confirming that he does have just a left thumb sprain, which is probably the best news that any Mavs fan could hope for, given what we thought it could have been based on the way he was describing it.
Yeah, definitely. I think I actually saw some people who kind of have more medical expertise, than you or I, who are focused on those areas, say that is the best case scenario for what you would hope for. So that definitely is encouraging to see for sure, because he definitely, throughout that game, just kind of noticing the things that are beyond the broadcast a bit. He was bothered by it throughout the game, which naturally, I mean, that probably hurt quite a bit,
Yeah,
with the way
and he still dropped 30 on him.
Yeah,
exactly.
He still dropped 30, and I thought it was interesting because his hand's still taped up the way that it was during the game when we were at the practice facility when he was shooting free throws. So that's probably, I would say, the way to expect it to be, going forward. But it'll be interesting to see how impactful that is. in the upcoming games that he plays, if he has any limitation. But another factor that is at least positive is his non-shooting hand, with it being his left. So at least that's a little bit of an easier set of circumstances than having that be like the right hand. So at least that's another layer of positivity for it overall. And, with Dereck Lively's injury, that's a very good sign that he's already questionable for Tuesday's game, because, in the arena for that Lakers game where he had that fall, he was on the floor for quite a while. Like eventually, basically everyone like kind of pulled over there, the whole team off the bench to really like look over him, and he had to be helped off. And it was interesting because he didn't put weight on his left foot at all to get off the floor. So at first it was like, is that a leg injury? How serious is that? But, I guess that must have been something with the back where, raising the leg might have, or lowering it, whatever you want to say, could have been a problem for him at the time. But at least, seeing him at the shoot around on Saturday, getting shots up, and then seeing him today, he was, very upbeat as he usually is. So it was like business as usual, it seems like, for him. But we'll see what his status is like. But the Mavs are 0-2, and there are 2 games without him. Luka praised him, saying he has amazing potential, and they missed him a lot after that Clippers loss. So, naturally, you definitely want to see him back in the lineup as soon as possible. And we'll have to see what that status will be for sure before the game.
And they're going to need Lively because they're facing a Rockets team with Alperen Şengün, who's a fantastic player in the middle and has got a lot of versatility to his game. Rockets are right now 8-6, have the best scoring defense in the league. And Ime Udoka, who's in his first year as head coach with Houston, has got them playing much better defense, something Jason Kidd talked about during, after practice on Monday, which is the idea that, Houston's playing a lot better on that defensive end, and the Mavericks are going to have the work cut out for them. With respect to that and looking at how the offense has been operating, again, held to the lowest point total against the Clippers, with those 88 points on Saturday night, what are you seeing? What is the film showing you when it comes to double teams and what that is looking like from an offensive standpoint, whether it be offensively, defensively, on what this Mavericks team is working on and what they'll need to continue to do going forward here?
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to be an interesting challenge. I think particularly with Houston, because Alperen Şengün, as you've mentioned, not only has he had that versatility, but he's improved actually quite a bit defensively this season as well. Like, they've had him play a little closer to the level of screens instead of playing in a deep drop, where that kind of puts him in a compromised position as someone who's not like that 7-footer with a lot of length to really like kind of just get vertical and provide a lot of pressure deep on drives. So like they've had him kind of mix it up compared to what he's done in the past. And that'll be interesting for the Mavs because, if they don't hard double, then that's going to be a situation where the big man's going to be able to maybe play more like they played against the Lakers, where, it's not quite that hard double where the ball is getting into the 4-on-3, but sometimes like with teams mixing it up, it might be, but, with that sort of like up to touch screen defense and then, getting back into a position that could create opportunities for those Gortat screens like Rashawn Holmes was setting against the Lakers. And, Dwight Powell likes to set as well. But overall, like, it changes a little bit when you have Lively in the lineup. Then you have more of an option with the lob threat as well, too. But definitely a lot of it starts with, this is not like a light years analysis by any stretch, but making shots makes a big difference. When the corner shooter is putting a lot of fear in the defense because Luka's getting the ball to them, and that low man has to really run out and fear the made three from a guy like Grant Williams or even just Derek Jones making the defense pay. That makes a world of difference to really open things up. And the Rockets provide like a pretty interesting challenge because Dylan Brooks really like gets after it. He embraces those tough matchups, and bulletin board material, seeing an all NBA type of player like Luka, he's going to want to get up for that one, just like he did, even recently at the FIBA World Cup when Slovenia played Canada. He really took on that matchup. So, seeing the different look Rockets where they're kind of having Şengün play a little different approach with the ball screens, having more versatile, stronger wing defenders. It's going to be a very different looking team compared to the one last year, where that was one of the few teams they actually really picked up the pace against because they just played no transition defense. Like Jalen Green and some of these other guys would just like half run up the floor, and you could just spray it ahead to Dwight Powell, and he would just like he would beat them down the floor and just finish. Like guys like that were just making a lot of plays. And I remember actually last year that was one of the questions. I was like, so y'all played really fast today. Is that like going to be a thing going forward? And it was like partly, Well, it was, if they're not going to play transition defense, we got to
We
take
can get on
advantage.
run on it. Exactly.
Yeah, and then it slowed down pretty fast immediately after. So it's definitely a very different overall team from what we saw last year, and it's going to be interesting to see the challenges that that poses as well. And they have some versatile options, like Jabari Smith can really get around defensively with switching and all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, I'm very curious to break down the film after the game happens, but lots of different things compared to last year.
Yeah, the Rockets right now playing some good basketball. They are on a 5-game road losing streak, but their most recent win was at home over the Denver Nuggets, and an impressive one at that. And you look at this roster, one of the things I said coming into the season, once they hired Ime Udoka, I said, hey, if they get some grown-ups in the room there with some of those young kids that they've got in Houston, they could turn this thing around fairly quickly. Now, obviously, 14-game sample size, still a lot to go when it comes to this team, but you're seeing the Fred VanVleets of the world. Obviously, you mentioned with Şengün and his development, Dylan Brooks there, one of their best defensive players. They've got guys who have been there, done that in some huge playoff situations as well, that has provided some real experience for this team. And with some of these young guys, especially, Jalen Green, who was a dynamo with his play so far, averaging nearly 20 points per game this season. They've got a good mix of young and veteran guys that you're seeing some better play from them that I think, for the Mavericks, they're going to have to bring, their best game, because if they don't, this is a team that can run, they can get out in transition, they're hyper athletic, they can play a little bit in the half court with Şengün and his abilities to be able to, make some things happen around the rim. It's a good Rockets team that the Mavericks are going to be facing, and if they don't take seriously, they can find themselves getting run out of the gym by this Ime Udoka coach team for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you think about the downfall, like the worst case scenario sort of circumstance, that'd be a team that's lost 5 of their last 7 games, if I'm not mistaken, if they lose this next one. Because I believe they've lost 4 of their last 6 already. So yeah, like this is definitely one of those like recalibration games, if you will, where they really got to, get back to a rhythm, find that rhythm offensively that really like was torching teams early on at times. Like Tim Hardaway was having games with like 5+ threes. In addition to Luka hitting step back threes, Kyrie doing what Kyrie usually does. So like they definitely have to kind of get comfortable back on their home floor, get things going again on that front, but handling their own business. Regardless of who is the opponent, but then also really respect what the Rockets are able to do, because that's definitely, as we've said, a very different team overall. But when you factor in the threat that Şengün can provide, he's someone that's really like buzzing right now in the NBA. Like a lot of superstars are giving him a lot of respect, whether it's like Paul George, James Harden. They're really seeing the threat that he poses inside. And if Dereck Lively, depending on his status, whether he plays or not, they're going to have to help him out with that, because that he's done a good
Everybody's
job.
got to crash the boards in this game. Everybody does.
Everyone has to crash, because that's another team that also has some of those wing players that are going to be aggressive. And in the fourth quarter of that Clippers game, especially the fourth quarter, Russell Westbrook, Terrence Mann, they were really aggressive, crashing from the weak side and coming up with those pivotal like offensive rebounds where they were pretty much momentum killers. Like the Mavericks, like down 13, 14, 15, 16, you're probably not going to come back anyways midway through a fourth quarter. But that was really like, you're really not going to come back if you're giving up offensive rebounds, second chances, that late in the game where you're already needing to really create advantages. So, handling things that are supposed to be handled on a daily basis like that will be important to see them, have a get right game. And then, the individual identity of the Rockets, those things like Şengün, not putting too much pressure on Lively if he is the one that's available to play and starting at center. Will be important as well, because he's a crafty player. He can get you in foul trouble, and then you can run into a problem as well where foul trouble is the reason why you may have your important rim protector not available. And that will be interesting to see how he handles it overall, because now he's played some crafty centers. He's played Jokic. He's handled Vucevic as well. So like a lot of those sort of like European centers that are crafty and can really make plays. Then you factor in the threat that Şengün poses as well. But it'll be interesting to see from a development standpoint how that goes. And then just overall, like there's been some slippage, I would say, at points throughout the season where perimeter players, especially against the Sacramento Kings that we talked about, and the Milwaukee Bucks, like there's got to be extra efforts made in a point to be made, instead of kind of standing, pointing, and expecting other people to make rotations. That was something that some would like to say like that's Luka or a superstar that would do that often, but there was other times where complementary players were doing things like that as well. And everyone just kind of has to have that regrouping and really lock in defensively. And I felt like they did play better defense overall as a team in LA. So there's an offense that was really like flat. So if they can continue to sustain some of that improvement defensively, containing teams to lower point totals below, like pretty much below 110 in both those games by a decent margin. That's the good progression towards what they want to build towards the end of, like throughout the season. So overall, pulling things together, I think it'll be an important game on Tuesday, and then they have a back-to-back to end the homestand. So that's where it gets a little tricky as well, where you want to have that isolated game where you had time to prepare and really get into the game, and then have a good game so you don't have to put too much pressure on yourself as a team in that back-to-back.
And that was one of the things I took away from their trip to Los Angeles was they held the Lakers to 101 points. You hold the Clippers to 107. Now you only score 88 in the game against the Clippers. So if you knock down some shots and you continue to play that kind of defense, you're going to win a lot of ball games. So that to me was interesting because, one of the takeaways from them being in Los Angeles was they actually had practice time. They were able to have a couple of, days off, with practice time before they took on the Lakers, and the same against the Clippers. So they've had a really tough schedule to start off the season. I think you've seen some of that play out in terms of the inconsistency on the defensive end. But the last couple of games, I've been encouraged by what they've been doing defensively, and you're hoping that carries over against a team in the Rockets. While, yes, they're the number one scoring defense in the NBA, this is a team that's in, the low 20s when it comes to scoring offense in the NBA. So as much as Şengün has played well, he's averaging 20 and 9 a game, for the Rockets, you can, if you're locked in defensively with your keys and everything, be able to deal with this scoring offense of the Houston Rockets. So I think for me, as long as they continue to stay building on that foundation where you saw much better rotations, I thought the communication was much better in those two games against Los Angeles, and couple the idea that you start knocking down some shots, unlike you did against the Clippers, you feel good about where this Mavericks team is now that they are actually able to get some things in terms of regular practice time in to be able to work on some of those things as well.
Definitely, and I feel like part of the execution on defense definitely does rely a bit on that shooting execution from the role players, and just overall, like superstars included as well, because it's a lot harder as an offense to really get going when you're taking the ball out after a made shot compared to like hauling in a really long rebound after a you could say a brick from the corner,
exactly,
and just pushing it. So overall, when things are kind of symbiotic in that nature, where you're knocking down shots, able to get back, get set, that goes a long way. But definitely, even in games where that wasn't happening in LA, it was encouraging to see like some progression after having like really like a new low. Like you could see the defensive stats from like game by game. They were like actively sinking worse when they were having that back-to-back against Milwaukee and then the Kings. It was like really, really poor against Sacramento. So seeing that progression was positive, but it definitely gets overlooked when you score 88 points as a team. And just one thing, I'm not saying that was the reason why, but like that was just a weird day overall. Like the court change out there at the arena from the LA Kings playing earlier in the afternoon, it was just a bizarre like feel, because it was like an hour and a half before the game. I think it was 6 flat when they said the court is open for players for a 7:30 tip-off. They didn't move the game back at all. So it was just very weird, where it was like a whole like group of like 4 or 5 players all at once are kind of just putting up shots. The ball from one player is hitting another. It was just a weird feel, and so definitely good to be back in your own arena, not having switch from the Dallas Stars happening hours before the game, and being able to get back into a routine. It'll be interesting to see if that carries over into some shot making. Sometimes shot making is just like a matter of stuff happens. Sometimes like you just miss shots.
Exactly.
And sometimes there's luck, but definitely back in the routine and being at home, it'll be good to see how those results translate.
I mean, the old adage in the league is it's a make or miss league. And it was definitely that against the Clippers when you were not knocking down shots but still playing some pretty good defense. You're not going to win a lot of ball games. And the other thing for me before we close is the idea that, I mean, you got to rebound the ball better. I know Lively is a big part of that, but you got out-rebounded by 20 against the Clippers in that game on Saturday. I don't care if Lively is missing or not. That's inexcusable for an NBA game to get out-rebounded by 20. I believe it was 57 to 37 in terms of the rebounding, disparity there. Mavericks got to be much better on the glass and attacking and everyone participating when it comes to rebounding the basketball. Because if you don't, the Rockets will get out there in transition and make some things happen. As I mentioned with Şengün, a guy who's averaging nearly 10 rebounds a game himself this season. So Mavericks got to be much better in terms of rebounding the ball. If they can, they'll find themselves in this game in what is the final in-season tournament game for the Mavericks, as they've been eliminated. I believe the Rockets, if they win this game, win their group when it goes to advancing to the knockout stages, this in-season tournament. But at least for the Mavericks, hey, maybe a chance to play a little bit of spoiler in the in-season tournament. You're not going anywhere, so do your best you can to spoil some things maybe for the Houston Rockets in this case.
There's $500,000 on the line for the Rockets, so take money out of their pockets. It's enough motivation for sure.
That for sure. Tip-off will be at 7:30 p.m. at the American Airlines Center, with pregame beginning with me on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network at 7 p.m. on 97.1 The Freak. And, of course, the Inside the Mavs podcast, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. Really appreciate you having joined us today on our show. Grant, tell the folks where they can find you and what you got going on, man.
Yeah, for sure. You can find, daily, articles about the Mavs, whether it's injury reports, game recaps, all kinds of stuff on DallasBasketball.com, where I'm at. And then I'll also be doing some, highlights and game breakdowns, like film stuff on my YouTube channel as well, which is just my name, Grant Afseth. You can find it that way. And basically just throughout the full 82, doing a lot of content every day, written in video, and then Inside the Mavs for sure.
And you can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. I'll be on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network again with pregame beginning at 7 o'clock with tip-off at 7:30 at the American Airlines Center as the Mavericks look to get back in the win column after splitting their Thanksgiving Tinseltown trip against the Lakers, and the Clippers now take on a Houston Rockets team that's looking to move forward in the in-season tournament. Meanwhile, the Mavericks trying to play spoiler while trying to get back into the win column. We'll be off for the next couple of days. Your boy's going to get some R&R. I'm going to head out on an out-of-town trip, but Grant's going to continue to do his thing when it comes to Inside the Mavs. Make sure you follow the Inside the Mavs account on Twitter, at Inside the Mavs. All of our content, show episodes, video content, you can find there as well. So make sure you follow Inside the Mavs on Twitter at Inside the Mavs. Mavs take on the Rockets on Tuesday nights. We'll recap everything as the week goes on right here on the Inside the Mavs podcast. Again, find Grant on Twitter at Grant Afseth. Find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. And make sure you subscribe to Kevin Gray Sports on YouTube as well, where you can watch every episode of Inside the Mavs. For Grant, I'm Kevin. We'll talk to you later here on Inside the Mavs, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. We'll talk to you later.